What was he on about? My body, mister, come figure it out with the Sonnet Sisters.
Neighbours, Godspeed. Welcome to Sonnet Sisters. My name is Anna and today I will be analysing sonnet number 7. Oh boy, sonnet number 7. I went down some Wikipedia rabbit holes on this one.
What is the meaning of this?
I'm going to start with translations of words and phrases. I did kind of get a bit jumbled in my research for this segment because it got a bit overwhelming. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of conflicting interpretations, so my notes are a bit all over the place, so please do forgive me and I will try to edit this into the most comprehensive, accessible order that I can. Lifts up his burning head, each under eye. So burning head is the sun's burning head. Each under eye is where it begins to get a little bit complex because under is said to mean earthly, mortal, lesser, inferior, lowly. So this could imply each inferior eye because the next line implies something that would make sense with that each inferior eye pays homage to this new appearing sight. However, some notes say that the sun is being referred to as an eye here, as it is later on in other sonnets. So that would imply under is being used as a noun, which is not unlike Shakespeare. He sometimes uses adjectives as nouns, as we know. So each inferior to the eye is what might be implied in that little phrase. Doth homage to his new appearing sight. So pays homage or pays worship to his new appearing sight, the sun's renewed appearance. So the sun appearing again today. Serving with looks his sacred majesty. The notes that I can find online are pretty clear about what they think this line means, and they're all in accordance with each other. However, it does conflict with implications of previous sonnets, which suggest that paying somebody with looks is to look at them. So the notes online suggest serving with looks is to avert your gaze. So serving somebody who has this kind of sacred majesty would be to avert your gaze out of respect for their level of superiority over you. And having climbed the steep up heavenly hill. Steep up here in the notes of this book is translated as precipitous, and if you look up precipitous it says steep, so basically steep up means steep. I don't know why they couldn't just say that in the notes, they had to be fancy. Heavenly hill is the sky, so having climbed the steep up heavenly hill, we are to imagine that the sun has now climbed the sky and is at its peak in the top of the sky. The well-known top of the sky. Resembling strong youth in his middle age, still looking like the young version of himself in his middle age. The sun, having climbed the sky, is obviously in the middle of the sky, is in its peak. So the imagery here conflicts a little bit if we are to read this as an allegory, a metaphor for a young man. If you're in your middle age, you're decidedly potentially past your peak if you're a man, talking about physicality and reproductive sense. Resembling strong youth in his middle age also assumes that something is past its strong youth if it's in its middle age. Yet mortal looks adore his beauty still. Shock horror, people are still looking at you and they're still enjoying your beauty, even though you're middle-aged. Isn't that shocking? Attending on his golden pilgrimage. Attending implies serving, servantdom, so some kind of duteous service. It also implies looking at or being present for, being attentive to. So attending on his golden pilgrimage, the sun having this golden sun-coloured journey through the sky. Pilgrimage also obviously brings in an element of religion and righteousness, but we'll go into the themes and implications later. But when from highmost pitch with weary car, so highmost, highest, pitch again means highest point. The notes here refer to a falcon's flight, so A pitch in a falcon's flight is the point at which it swoops, or just before it swoops to attack. So the implication is it's going to be down from here. Weary car is potentially another reference to Phoebus, the classical sun god, and his sun chariot. So the poor sun god and his chariot are tired from climbing the sky. Like feeble age, he reeleth from the day. This seems to be the first introduction of simile as opposed to metaphor. So it's now saying, like with age, like if a man was growing old, he reeleth from the day. He is tired from his work of the day, from his journey. So the sun is tired from his climbing of the sky, as a man might be in the middle age of his life. I wonder what this puts you in mind of. The eyes for duteous now converted are. The eyes that were dutiful to you before, or dutiful to the sun before, are now converted. They're now turned away. From his low tract and look another way. So from the sun's low path, its downhill trajectory, people are looking away from that. They're not interested. So thou, thyself outgoing in thy noon. Outgoing is said to mean outstripping and exhausting yourself, and noon is said to mean your prime, your peak state, bracketed here, of masturbatory sexual arousal. So good old Shakespeare, who hates masturbation, is implying again that if you masturbate, you're going to exhaust and waste yourself. Unlooked on diest, unless thou get a son. So you'll die without being looked at by anybody. Nobody will be looking at you or caring unless you beget a son, unless you have a son. So, before we go into the layers and layers and layers behind this poem, I think we can agree that the gist of the image that Shakespeare is portraying here suggests that the subject, or the sonnetee, is a bit like the sun, is beautiful, is hot, is above others, is superior to others, is important for the continuation of the survival of man. Like the sun rises and falls, man will grow, reach a peak, grow old and die. There are similar issues with this metaphor to the ones that arose in sonnet number 5, in that the seasons, the daily journey of the sun, these are things that will come again, although man will not come again after he dies. Interestingly, a lot of the notes I found online suggested that the sun will go on forever. Of course, that's not the case. The sun will burn out and die itself as well. It'll just take a fair bit longer than one man's lifetime, and possibly all men's lifetimes. Maybe that's what they were suggesting. So the sun dies at night and is forgotten, and so will you be as a man unless you decide to have children. Maybe the sun's equivalent is that when it dies at night, it leaves behind a reflection of itself on the moon. Maybe if this man has a child, the child will be his moon. There are a few different themes which arise in this poem and are brought into your consciousness with repetition of certain sounds, certain associative words. Let's start with a simple one, which is looks and eyes. Each under eye, serving with looks, yet mortal looks, the eyes, look another way, unlooked on diest. Attending. This might imply that looks are something that are quite important to the subject of the sonnet, and perhaps that he is quite vain. The next recurring theme is religion. So there are a few words in this sonnet which sound religious or imply religious qualities. There's gracious, sacred, heavenly, pilgrimage, duteous, converted, homage, and I would argue tract could be in relation to religion or spirituality in the sense of a treatise. These religious words are aligned with words associated with beauty and prime or youth, which continues the idea that it is righteous to be beautiful, it's a good ethical quality to be beautiful, and to use that beauty wisely to reproduce. The next theme is age, so we are told of strong youth, middle age. Age also comes up in the words homage and pilgrimage. So age is constantly present, we're constantly being reminded of age throughout this sonnet. Obviously, the message being that age is a constant advancement upon the subject of the sonnet, and that he needs to do something at a certain age or by a certain age. The next theme present in this sonnet is imperialism, and that is quite a meaty one. We have references to the Orient for the East, golden pilgrimage, which could be referring to the seeking of wealth in other places, other countries. Burning head is also said to potentially refer to a leader. The next reference which is said to relate to this theme is new appearing sight, and that is said to be the newly gained knowledge by the colonised. And I take umbrage with that a little bit, because I would have thought that the new appearing sight or the newly gained knowledge would be by the colonisers, because they're going to a new place and absorbing a new culture, rather than people who are being invaded being told what a wonderful place the West is. So I found that a bit offensive as a modern person. Serving with looks becomes quite an obvious link under this theme. People might have to avert their gaze out of respect for their new ruler if they're being colonised. While we're on the topic of imperialism, this sonnet puts me in mind of, there's a 2005 film called The Sun, which is by a Russian director, and it's about the Japanese emperor who was referred to as the Sun. The emperor's family are also supposed to be direct descendants of a sun goddess, Amaterasu. So they're seen as heavenly or otherworldly and above the normal state, above normal people, and are worshipped as such. There's this fantastic idea called cosmic economy, which promotes the stability of beauty, immortality, empiric rule, which is a bit scary. The second quatrain in this sonnet gives us hope of achieving cosmic economy. And having climbed the steep up heavenly hill, resembling strong youth in his middle age, yet mortal looks adore his beauty still, attending on his golden pilgrimage. So that gives us hope that this will continue. Using empirical references does make sense if these sonnets were commissioned for a young man of status, because having children becomes more important than just this idea of beauty, because children become heirs. These references to an idea of empire or empirical rule do make sense if this sonnet was one which was commissioned for a young man of status, because reproducing becomes something more important than doing it just because you're beautiful. This introduces the idea of children becoming heirs. Obviously the word heir is used before, but that reason is never quite so prominent as in this sonnet. Which leads on to another feature of this poem, which might be the first outright mention that the child this person has should be a son. Obviously, a son would be a more useful heir to somebody's fortune. Now, there are references to that kind of thing in previous sonnets. So in sonnet number 1, we hear about a tender heir. Obviously, that would imply a boy. In sonnets 3 and 6, posterity is mentioned, and in sonnet number 4, legacy is mentioned. All of those things would have probably hinged on a boy. So this is the first time we have an outright mention of a son. There is, of course, this thread of strong youth versus feeble age, which is quite exhausting, to be honest, to be immersed in for this many poems and to read through in order. It's quite tiring reading about age being such a wearying, ruining thing, and honestly I might have to write some sonnets to redress the balance, which favour ageing and celebrate what can come with ageing that is good. The film The Sun leads me on to another point, which is that the sun was worshipped in Eastern lands. The sun was considered kingly among heavenly bodies according to Ptolemaic astronomy. So the sun is right up there. It's one of the highest beings. We have another reading of his burning head, which could refer to the sun gods, one of whom was called Helios and was often depicted with a flaming head. Again, that elevates the sun or the subject of the sonnet to immortal status. There's a lot of pressure and responsibility being placed on the man who's being likened to the sun. The sun is obviously of utmost importance and is absolutely necessary for human survival, and now he's being called godlike, essentially. He's being bestowed godlike power to continue the human race. There are some arguments online about how you should pronounce the line resembling strong youth in his middle age, how you should emphasise that line. Personally, it sounds quite obvious to me. Resembling strong youth in his middle age follows iambic pentameter, and that would emphasise the word strong. Obviously, the word youth is quite important, and strong youth is important to directly contrast with middle age. I don't see what the fuss is all about, and I think personally, however you interpret that will work. There is some nice stuff online about the line, "Yet mortal looks adore his beauty still," which says that, basically his fans aren't all disappearing at once. They are waiting for surer signs of his decline, and I love that idea. I love the idea of an empire full of people looking to the sun or the leader and, waiting to know whether he is decrepit and worthless and going to have children or not. We need to know where to look. I also think this line, resembling strong youth in his middle age, could be a little bit of a callback to previous sonnets in which Shakespeare has said that a young version of yourself, a child of you, will look like you, or you will look like them. There will be a resemblance, there will be a memory of your youth in the child. There's something a little bit odd about the pacing of this poem, about the timeline of it. So this is implying that the man can wait until middle age when he will be at his peak, and we've been told by science at times that a man's physical peak is actually much younger than a woman's physical peak, and so a man's one is around teens, 20s, which is their peak time to have a child, their sexual peak. Women's sexual peak is much older, in middle age. This sonnet is telling the man that he can wait until middle age and people will still be looking at him, he will still be beautiful, and that it's implied that will be his last chance to decide to have a child, which is unusual because in Shakespeare's time people will have been having children earlier. And it calls into question for me what youth will have meant to them and what middle age will have, but there does seem to be a little bit of a conflict there. So now we get back to the dirty stuff, which is, like feeble age he reeleth from the day, and some interpretations of this suggest that this is like someone staggering away from their own brightness. So the sun is falling in the sky again because it's blinded by its own bright light in the middle of the sky, or a man has reached his peak age-wise and is staggering backwards towards death from this exhaustion, this blaze in the middle of his life, in his physical peak. And of course the final couplet implies that this man has been exhausting himself by masturbating, by wasting his sex. So this guy must have had so many solo orgasms that he is driving himself to the grave from the height of the sky. It's too silly. Obviously, as we've mentioned before, die or death or diest can be a reference to orgasm as well. So the last line, unlooked on diest, could refer to, obviously, as we've said before, dying or death is sometimes a reference to orgasm. So unlooked on diest could be a reference to orgasming alone. Unless thou get a son. So if you decide not to have children, you are orgasming alone. Sad, 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 wrong, wrong. So how the hell do we perform a poem like this? Well, I think it helps to know all those potential references, but that is a lot of different roads you could go down. So I think you need to begin by deciding what the context is and who you're speaking to, how you feel about them, and all of that is completely arbitrary, because we know why this was probably written and who it was probably written for, but it's so abstract and so beautiful, and it is a poem, so we can do whatever we want with it. And there are so many options. I'm still quite keen on my original idea of talking to a middle-aged, washed-up rock star who's just had his first bad gig and is starting to see into the precipice of, just past his prime, being spoken to by, a woman who's rubbing off his glam and his makeup to reveal the natural him underneath, the aging him. I also like the idea of a empirical or wealthy youth who is going on some kind of gap year pilgrimage to find himself and maybe to escape the trappings of being this wealthy person with expectations on him. Maybe he's expected to go to university, maybe he's expected to have a family already, and is trying to escape that and find some kind of spirituality, some kind of meaning, or just escape some kind of release in a foreign land. So I quite like those two ideas in the interpretation of it. Obviously, the first idea would be easier for me to film, because I have more friends that look like rock stars than friends that look like mountains. So we'll see what happens in the performance. That is it, I think, for the analysis. I feel like I haven't even scraped the surface of this sonnet, because each interpretation, each phrase is so meaty. I think I could probably disappear down a black hole into this sonnet forever. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. Let me know what you've discovered about it, what you know about all of those things, about Helios, Apollo. Tell me about the sun gods. So I'll see you on Saturday for the performance of this sonnet. Until then, rest you merry. Like the sun rises and falls, serving with looks is obvious and blah, 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 blah.